We are back with Empires of the Future, and a voice from the past has come and joined me today in the podcast studio. What we wanted to do was to get that guy Denton Ice in here. He had something come up today. So who is here? Who are you?
I'm Matt Castro, who was one of the original co-founders of your said podcast, which I'm very encouraged that it's still alive and well.
I'm very encouraged that you're continuing to podcast.
Yes, his pastor in his newspaper.
There you go.
Which, we talked a lot about articles and stuff back in the day. So in some ways, I just took what we did here. I'll say this, though. I do not enjoy doing podcasts by myself. It's not as fun. Yeah. It's actually quite hard to keep a conversation going by yourself because you don't get the opportunity to stop and think about what you're about to say. You always have to keep it going. It was kind of rough in the beginning because I'm on my third season of it. It was very rough in the beginning, but it's gotten better. Yeah. I've gotten better at it. And so yeah. I haven't done books, which we're doing today.
Well, that would be exhausting, I would think.
Yeah, I did do Tim Keller's last book, Forgiveness.
Good.
I did talk about that book in particular, and I talked about another book. I talked about a book on leadership. Yeah. So I've done some books, but most of it's articles or magazine articles or Christianity Today articles or things like that. So,
remind us about where you are and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, or better said, Collierville, Tennessee, which is a suburb of Tennessee. I grew up there. I went to high school there. My parents live nearby, so we live close to my mom and dad. And we are about 45 minutes east of Memphis. Yeah. It's hot right now, very humid, and so it's nice. It's a little bit cooler up here. I've definitely have felt it. I work at Central Church. I'm the adult ministry pastor, and I do missions as well. So we live there. Our kids, we have 4 kids now. So we are staying with a family who couldn't remember how many kids we had, and so they just kind of kept coming out of the car. I didn't know you had that kid. I'm like, yeah, we had him before we moved. Teddy. That was during COVID, so that was kind of a period where no one knew what happens in your life because everything was kind of like, what a weird time that was. But then we had another child. His name is Jack in Memphis. All right. So he'll turn 2 in September. So we have 4 kids now. Yep. And we have a nice little existence in Collierville, Tennessee.
Very good. And congratulations on another child. You're doing that Christian thing, being fruitful and multiplying.
Yes, we are doing what you want. Yes, which kids are awesome, but they're a lot of work. and I'll say it this way. This helps with the content we're going to talk about. We have a pool. And pool is a great thing to have, but when you have little kids, it's a terror. Yes, it's a death trap. Yes. And we actually had a kid in our neighborhood who died. They drowned in the pool. They got in the backyard of not their pool, but another neighbor's pool. So we've been building a fence. Our fence was it wasn't great. The owners when they built the house, they built this fence and it was not a great fence. So we've been replacing it, but the fence kind of guarded any child from getting into the pool. So it's been a huge terror. This fence, it needs to be put up. We can't keep it open or kids are going to die in the pool. So it is it's a terror, just so afraid that you're going to be that family whose little kid fell in the pool and dies. Right. So that's been a fear. You're always just kind of looking through the window at the pool, making sure there's not a body.
Yeah, learning experience. It's just part of living with a situation. Every neighborhood has its stories and these sorts of things.
So we keep the gate locked. We keep it. There's a fence around our pool that's constantly locked. So yeah. So, but that's kind of our existence in Collierville.
Yeah, well, you and I have kept in contact over the last couple of years as you've been moved away, but I'm very glad that you came through to visit, and your old family's here, and you're staying in town and then passing on through. This is a great opportunity that we can come together, and as you and I have been talking the last few weeks, what we could talk about a whole lot of things. We never have had a hard time talking about almost anything.
No.
One of the easy things that occurred to us was the newest book by Jonathan Haidt. We have talked in the past about The Righteous Mind.
Right, I remember.
You and I, and that's one of our longest podcasts that we've ever done. That's a pretty complex book.
Was it a two-parter?
No, it should have been probably, but it was not, in fact.
We were so green at that.
And
somebody will listen to a 2-hour.
And, you know, I don't. One of the things that happens is I know you and I have talked about the coddling of the American mind. It seems like it's come up in recordings, at least, and so we've talked about that at some length. And so I would almost like to say Jonathan Haidt is a friend of the podcast, but maybe one day we'll, rise to the heights to have him on himself. Interesting guy he's a social psychologist out of the NYU Stern School of Business. So if you're unfamiliar with him, his first book was called The Happiness Hypothesis. His trend has been trying to look at ancient wisdom and apply it to our current day, starting with that book, and continues on specifically talking about kids. I don't know if you've heard, but kids are kind of anxious now. Yes,
they are. I think, working with college students as long as I did when I did live here in Evansville, especially Generation Z, they're full of anxiety, and it really was a difficult generation to work with, mostly because they struggle to be passionate about a lot of things. They worry about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. They're not very. It's hard to inspire them, I would say. And so when you think about Christian ministry and really kind of like building them up to, especially like to impact their fellow friends and classmates and generation, that was a difficult thing to do because they're just so hard to get moving and motivated, and they're always afraid of what could happen, especially in social situations. And I find that they struggle to have fun. They struggle to enjoy life. I remember I'd ask questions like, "What are you passionate about?" And they just don't have an answer for you. Yeah. Which I would say millennials, which I'm like an older millennial, we don't struggle with talking about passion. Yeah. In some ways, it gets us into trouble because we are passionate about so many things. Yeah.
You reminded me of Ecclesiastes as you're talking. It's like at a very, it's like,
what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? Yeah, it's meaningless. Yeah, I think the anxious generation, of course, it is the generation that has always been connected to the internet. Yeah. Of course, now that even though we were born and lived as a child before the internet, and we have definitely been like impacted by the internet. Right. We remember a time when we weren't constantly connected. Like we didn't carry. I think I've been told this, that the computer system on an iPhone is far more powerful than the ship that went to the moon. Right. Like that's what we're talking about. So you have that in your pocket. Right. So you have an entire generation that literally can pull out their phone and search anything. Yeah, and so I look forward to really getting into this, because one thing that it makes me think about is it feels to me like in the 2000s we talked a lot about information overload. Mm. And that's definitely at play, but it is certainly true that what seems to happen generation by generation is we only have the capacity to talk about so many problems at once. Right. And we especially have a hard time with people who say things like, well, let's consider that for some people, some of these problems might be a real high-level problem. For some people, this might be a mid-level problem. Or for some people, this might be a low-level problem. If you were to talk about attention span. Some people have a better attention span. Some people have a much worse. So that's going to be an issue for certain people. But we are living through a time period that, without a doubt, if all of us are here and gone, and you say 100 years from now, a totally different generation is around, we will be talking about, okay, having the internet so readily available did do certain things to the generation that had to deal with that. Right. And that I do believe it's true that what you said, that you and I, it is a distinctive advantage to at least have known a world where you didn't have all of that in your pocket all the time. And to know what it might be like in theory, you and I today could say, you know what, we're just going to
stop with the cell phones.
Right.
We're going to go, I'm going to go to the life that I lived at age 18, where when I leave my house, people just don't know where I'm at.
Right.
And we at least knew that life, and we knew what that life was like, which it really is a powerful thing to have lived a different lifestyle to that degree. And that is just, haven't been examples. There are no kids in general who are doing that now, and certainly there's not like representative kids in each community who are doing that, like living in families where there are just not cell phones, for instance.
Right.
And so this is a powerful question then, like what is driving all of the anxiety that is present. And so as always, what we're going to do, this is not a Christian book, by the way, but we're going to look at these questions from a Christian context and talk about fear. I want to throw out this summary. 4minutebooks.com, helpful website, summarizes the book this way. The anxious generation shows how smartphones, social media, and helicopter parenting have led to a decline in young people's mental health and offers actionable solutions to help both our kids and ourselves become mature, emotionally stable adults.
Very good. There's so much we haven't even scratched the surface on. Like, I mean, now we live in a world where you don't even know what gender you are. I mean, like, what is it? You can go on whatever dating app you can go on, and you can choose from like countless number of genders. So, like, if you're even from a foundational level aren't even secure in like what gender, like what sex you are, like, how could you possibly live day to day with any type of like freedom, carefreeness, joy, when you're like, am I really a woman caught like trapped in a man's body, or vice versa, or am I actually, some kind of like combination of the two, or am I a them? Like, it's just so much factors that generate this particular generation. This doesn't have like their presuppositional foundational things are so fluid now that how could you possibly be secure?
Right. So you immediately have this issue of paralysis of choice.
Oh, yeah.
That it's just kind of like the view of human nature is so flawed,
right,
that to think I will survey all of the possible gender identities and sexuality options and job options and future options, and knowing what I know, I will then, with all the power that is within me, just plot my own course and make my way through all of those, dealing with every contingency that comes up and all those eventualities and just marching right through them. It's like, oh, no, you clearly won't. But we live in this mirage of just kind of like, well, you have such inner power that you'll choose this and you'll just make it work.
Right.
No, and I would think that's one thing that the information overload has already done to us, is made us think you can just, all of these options are equally viable for you. So why don't you just pick one based upon your picking ability and just kind of follow that course? It's like, okay, so is it guaranteed to work out well for you? Oh no, there are dangers, pitfalls, cliffs, not to mention thorns, briars, and like it is with choices. Some of the choices, hey, you might have a good day or two or five. Okay, then what do we do? Well, our scheme tends to be very individualistic, which is, well, maybe there will still be people around who would help you if things should go really wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, well, this is a flawed scheme, but this is where we live. And so one of the things to say right out of the gate then is that we don't have a diagnosis of the good of anxiety and fear, because anxiety is an indication inside of you that, hey, you can't predict the outcomes of this thing.
Right, that's true.
And so you should take stock
that's true.
of what you're doing here. It might not turn out the way that you think. And certain ones of these eventualities are real bad, and you could end up in a very bad spot all by yourself, which would be very, very toxic, damaging for you. And so the function of anxiety is a blind spot, we can say, from the start. But then, thankfully, just recently, Denton and I have talked a fair amount about fear from a biblical perspective. And so the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, so that we do know that there is a proper place for some fears, but the Bible also says you should not be dominated by fear. It, in fact, is one of the last facets of being in a fallen world that can be defeated by the Christian, is that perfect love drives out fear. Yeah. That fear can be overcome if the fear of God is in the proper context, and then you recognize, look, I am fallen, and also before that I was a small little creature made by God, not self-sustaining, not self-sufficient, so that certain things can beat me, and in fact certain things will beat me every day, and I can still get back up and go, well, Lord, I was never the center of all things. You are, so help me to get back up and keep on pushing on ahead. But then obviously the Christian says, to the glory of God, not for my own ends, not that I'm the center of all things, that you are, and that I can find my place and my life in you. So that's a very good place to start.
You know, I mean, if you think about just the way the world has developed so fast, you know, you talk about 150 years ago, if you didn't live on my town has a train track that goes right through it. So Collierville was a town that was a train town. You know, during the Civil War, it was, you know, you would have soldiers come through during the Civil War, or, you know, other resources. And so, you know, you were a prominent town if you were on a train route. But if you weren't on a train route, you were pretty disconnected from the world. Right. Significantly. Like, you probably wouldn't meet anybody from a different part of the world, or even a different part of the state, potentially. But things changed so fast, especially with the introduction of the car and the airplane and transportation. But then the internet just expanded information, but also expanded, like, you can legitimately talk to someone I had a phone call with a Zoom call this week with a guy who's a professor at a school in Singapore. And, like, I literally talked to him by video, and he lives halfway around the world. Right. And it wasn't like it wasn't like he went in and out. Like, it was both of our internet was really good. Right. So where he was crystal clear, I was crystal clear. We both heard each other perfectly well. On the Zoom call, he could share his computer screen with me, so I could literally see, like, what's on his. Like, that's the world we live in now. Yes. Or I don't even have to live in Singapore. Right. And I could talk to someone who's sitting there in Singapore. Like, that's, the world has changed so dramatically that even though the world, and I think your notes, the world is actually safer statistically than it ever has been, but yet people don't feel that. Yes, and certainly that's in part because we have to know about bad things that happen all over the place at all times. Right. It's really interesting what you mentioned a minute ago, that you know a scary story from your neighborhood where you currently live, which has always happened throughout human history. Right. Bad things have happened locally, which makes us go, okay, this can happen here. I don't think any of us, I mean, and this has been talked about since the 80s when I was a kid, I don't think any of us is still adjusted to the fact that you turn on the news and it's like, watch out, there's gang violence in Singapore and Portland or whatever, and well, watch out, there's lightning storms over in Texas, or and it's just kind of like, well, I can't watch out for all of this at once. Like, what am I going to do? Get my suit of armor with rubber around it and just, like everywhere I go, And so that's we have no solution for that problem. No. I mean, it's like, if you walked around every day and somebody said, hey, Matt, watch out when you go down the stairs, man. People drip downstairs every day and die. It's like, that's true. That's true. Hey, man, watch out for that doorknob. There's germs on doorknobs, okay? Right. There is some degree to which our anxiety is driving questions and concerns that we cannot simply say, hey, none of that stuff could get you, man. It's like, oh, no, so that stuff gets people every day. It does. And measuring it is very hard for us. And I wanted to drop this since it's for my particular podcast because it happened and I haven't really gotten to talk about it. But, like, so people are like, and I get it, but I when Trump was shot, people are kind of freaking out, like, well, look where we've come in our country. And I'm like, well, that he's not the first politician to get shot at, by the way. Right. Like, Reagan got shot, by the way. Well, yeah, I mean, would you have said that when Reagan was president, that the world is like going to chaos? I'm like, other politics. We've had presidents killed and shot.
Yeah, we've had
JFK.
4 presidents assassinated.
Yeah, so this isn't new.
Yeah, and that is something that for myself, I specifically in conversations don't allow, if I can, for people to say things like, "Oh, look how far we've fallen. It's never been like this before." It's like, "Oh, don't tell yourself that."
Yeah,
I mean, that's just clearly not true, and it's not helpful for you.
It's not helpful
for any of us.
Because it feeds that anxiety monster continuously. Like, if the world is, in your mind, is worse today than it was yesterday, or vice versa, then you kind of it just goes. You go deeper into this fear hole, and I'm not saying, I guess we're Christians, but the world has fallen. Yes, people sin. Yes, people do sinful things. And I think from this particular situation, the individual who shot at Trump it seems like a guy who was in deep depression and anxiety, right? And that won't be the last time someone like that, who's super depressed or super and there's mental health that he's very affected by, that does something like that.
Yeah.
But are you going to build this type of viewpoint that the world is so bad, and therefore you want to protect your children or you protect your grandchildren, like you want to hold them a little bit tighter even more? It's like, what? Again, just use your reason. Like, this isn't the first time this has happened, and the world is actually safer in some ways than it ever has been. But people just aren't open to those type of facts and statistics.
Yeah, I mean, and our blind spots seem to be around us as relational creatures, that you have to have relationship with other people, not just like you need lots of them.
Not just your family.
And like lots of every kind of relationship. It is the best for each of us to see people every day that we know well, but also to see people every day that we don't know at all, and be constantly learning to go deeper and broader. And that's the best thing for us. Yes. But we are living in a moment when the tools that we have encourage the opposites of some of those impulses. With the tools that we have urge us to go deeper into ourselves and to think just more like the way you think. Right. The problem is you're too open to other people. It's like, oh no, not at all. That is actually not the problem in any little bit. And we have not yet innovated. Anybody out there who has ideas about how to innovate in terms of relational tools, like there are no comparable like social media tools that I know of. Imagine a Craigslist, for instance, where what you do is you say, "Hey, I'm willing to rake somebody's leaves today. I'm going to rake one lawn," and then somebody just says, "Well, please, I would love that." And you go, "Well, there's people who try to take advantage of senior adults." It's like, yes, but also people would go out and just help somebody, and then they would say, "Hey, have a good day. This was not ever about money." We have not innovated in ways that just encourage relational strength and that encourage new relationships and into the growth of old ones, and that's a problem. And in this vein, this very sad story that starts the book is really important. He says, one October afternoon in 2006, the 13-year-old Megan Meyer hanged herself with a belt in her bedroom closet. Why? Megan had spent too much time on MySpace, and the mother of a classmate had been cyberbullying her under a fake profile. I wish Megan Meyer's story was a tragic one-off. Sadly, it's only one of thousands. Between 2010 and 2020, the rate of suicide among U.S. adolescents aged 10 to 14 has increased by an average of 121%. It begs one question above all: why? Why would such a young person, a child, basically ever have cause to end their own life? End quote. And so this is a real challenge. I will challenge anyone. I left youth ministry just a couple of years ago, but a lot of people will say, well, yes, teenagers have always had a hard time. That's true. Growing up is difficult. It is not easy, and it is one step forward, two steps back often to go from a child to an adult. Right. But the tools that we have handed young people right now are particularly damaging to them in ways that we are underplaying. And this story is unfortunately not a one-off story. This is not something that's only happened once. And when you think of it in terms of, oh, okay, is this driving events that are very tragic like this one, or is it driving bad social interaction regularly. It's doing both. It is social media is harmful to people because at its basic idea, if you read the basic idea behind all forms of social media, it is statements like, we just want to help people connect with each other. Okay, that is, people have connected with each other throughout history. And we connect with each other in helpful, positive ways and harmful, negative ways every day. But social media is driving the ability for people to never disconnect from each other. Right. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, number one, social media it's not real connection. This gets into, context of people in places. Right now we're sitting in a room. By the way, your podcast setup has really y'all become pros. I remember back in the days.
I'd like to say semi-pro.
I mean, you got sound panels on the wall.
Yeah.
But I remember when we first started, I think we spent most of our time just setting it up.
That's true. It's true.
But I'm trying to remember my train of thought. But it's not. So we're sitting in a room. We're talking.
Yeah.
What if we were doing this over the internet? Which you could do podcasts over the internet. Mm-hmm. It's not being in the room with a friend that you haven't seen in a while.
Right.
Has a lot of benefits. Like there's to have real relationships in real places in real context is what God created us to have. I mean, Christ came into the world. He didn't come as like a phantom. It wasn't a social media tweet.
Right.
It was real.
Right. He didn't send us a letter and say, "Hey, straighten yourselves out."
Hey, when John talks about how he's sees the glory of the Lord and full of grace and truth, that was real. Like, this isn't it's not a letter. It's real.
Right.
Like he came, and I think there's significance. I mean, I love hanging out with people. I would love getting coffee with people, sitting there having coffee and talking. What was so bad about COVID was that it took away the physical interaction, and you would think. That's why I asked you when this was written. You would think that COVID would have taught generations and parents and kids how important it is to have real relationships with real people, and really cherish them and actually pursue them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's actually been I think what ended up happening is that people actually enjoyed, unfortunately, not actually being in the same room with someone. And I think that's such a sad reality that we need people, but we need real people, in real context, where you can kind of, in the South, we were talking about this, we have, in the South, people are very touchy in the South, not in the Midwest, but in the South, people like to kind of touch your arm, touch your shoulder. They're very affectionate, right?
Sure.
And cultures that are that way, they really do enjoy being in the same room with a person and legitimately getting to know them, being affectionate, and how impactful that is, right? There's been studies on how important human touch is, right? When you remove human touch and you remove being in the flesh with people and you throw it online, it's substandard relationships. And if that's all that you're all your relationships are there, literally it's just photos that you send to people, that's so not what God created us to do. And therefore there's consequences if that is all that you pursue socially.
Right.
And so, yeah.
So what we have then is some details here from Jonathan Haidt, okay, let me get specific on what are the harms that I'm talking about. And so here's where he's going to go with this. He says, here are 3 lessons to show you why mental health is down across the globe and what we can do to improve it for everyone. Quote, he says, number 1, there are 4 foundational harms that threaten the mental health of our children. With 4 foundational reforms, we can undo much of the suffering, technology, and overprotection caused for our kids. That was 2. And 3, you can use 6 spiritual practices to improve both your own and your kids' mental health. But let's start with...
And the spiritual there is very new agey.
Yeah. So that's obviously a point where we're going to go, that's very vague, and I don't think it's going to help you to make up your own spirituality, because let me tell you, if you think there's problems trying to make up your own social methods, there's going to be some real problems making up your own spirituality. Yeah. All right, so lesson 1, 4 foundational harms. Quote, since 2010, tech companies have basically done the same. I suggest exploring our kids' attention and mental health for profit. Childhood is an apprenticeship for learning the skills needed for success in one's culture. That's a Jonathan Haidt kind of specialty right there. Mm-hmm. Childhood is an apprenticeship for learning the skills needed for success in one's culture. Millions of children are now hampered in learning those skills because they live in their phones instead of reality. There's a good statement we could all sit around and think about. Are we encouraging people and ourselves to live in our phones instead of reality? Our connections in the real world share 4 distinct properties. 1, they rely on body language. 2, they happen in sync with others. This is stuff you were just talking about a minute ago. They happen in sync with others. A lot can be said right there. Communication happens in sequence and with a few individuals, max. And 4, they happen in communities with high barriers to entry.
Yeah, one of the, I think it's one, I think this is where social media in particular, in some ways, guards from the importance as a child to just learn. Like, humans are awkward. Like, we are very, there is, and I think it's the byproduct of the fall, and, we are not comfortable at all the times. There is fear.
Yeah.
That is a byproduct of the fall. Like, we are, especially on the horizontal and Cain killed Abel, right? That didn't happen in the garden. There was a fear there. Fear of animals and things like that. Like that relationship is hampered by the fall. So therefore, there is awkwardness, there is fear and barrier of entry. But the growth in the childhood is to overcome those fears and awkwardness. So I kind of learn from them over time. And the way you are so afraid, where my hands are, I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
Then you learn to go okay, I feel comfortable talking with my hands, or I don't have any problems going in and shaking someone's hand, and you just kind of learn over time. I used to be someone who really struggled to look people in the eye. I would always but now I don't struggle with that anymore. I've become more confident. So that's just how you grow as a human. But you have to put yourself in socially awkward situations to learn over time, trial and error, there's failures. There's I wasn't very comfortable in social situations, but I continued to practice. Where I can talk to anyone and feel, somewhat comfortable in my skin. That's a part of that apprenticeship that he's talking about to learn.
Right.
But if you are not forced to learn that, if your parents are in some ways are protecting you from that, because a child says, well, I'm not comfortable. I don't want, and a parent's like, okay, fine. Then you don't have to go to that church party or that church youth thing. Well, you can just stay at home because you don't want to go. You're afraid of social interactions. Well, they're not learning.
Right, and one of the simple things that we all understand that is a problem is that parenting and helping a young person to become a full-grown adult is very challenging, complex. You don't win all the time, but then handing someone a device and saying, hey, see what you can do with this, like a phone or a tablet or whatever, it keeps their attention. It's easy. Yeah. And so you're going to have this trend that when there is parents who are absent, when there is struggle in the home of various kinds, when a lot of kids have, very sort of non-traditional kind of family setups, that there is a knee-jerk sort of well, probably they need plenty more time than with the phone, or even it's not cognizant. It's just well, I don't know. They just have that, and then we'll just let them have it and live in it.
That's where their friends are.
Yes. There you go. That's where their friends are. I just want to talk to my friends. I've just this week talked to parents who are my age who are dealing with teenagers and kind of saying they just say to me no, I just want to talk more to my friends. I just really want to talk this through with my friends. And these devices enable them to really collapse their world. And so some of the struggles that we have seen, which is identified to many generations of the past, say, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that, they only spend time with other teenagers. Well, that has collapsed down to even more so true, but then also added this new problem of these fake interactions that you have with people that are contextless, where you read a 140 character tweet or a Instagram post with a picture of a meme that says, I don't let anybody hold me down, and you think you're connecting, that you think that somehow we feel the same, and it's well, that is at the very least I can say that is a fake connection, and it is so minimal. Even if you don't want to all the way go to fake, it is not enough to connect you. It is not enough to bind you. It is not enough to promise anything for the future, and that's what we want out of relationships.
And I would say even that parents, even Christian parents, they don't teach their children through practice some of the important doctrines of Scripture. Like, for example, if your child is scared of the dark or scared of whatever, kids watch television shows or they watch things and or they hear stories and they tend to have like a mental picture of like that could happen to me, right? And so they're afraid. They're afraid of the possibilities. Like my son Lincoln is afraid of someone coming into the window and taking him. He had heard some story of some kid, and that kind of created this fear in his mind. And so you're like, okay, what do you do in that situation? Well, here's some important doctrines you can teach your children. Number one, the Lord is sovereign. We are all under the government of the Lord and His sovereignty and His lordship. Nothing happens outside of His outside of His will and plan. Number two, the Lord is everywhere, and He's present. And so if you tend to solve those fearful problems with, like putting like wooden, things on their doors just to kind of like, or on their windows to say, no one's ever going to come in here. Look, we just put this metal thing on your window so that, you can't even look outside, but nobody's going to get in here, or whatever you do, or you let them sleep in your own bed, whatever those things are. All you're doing is telling them, yeah, you should be afraid. Like that's actually what you should be. And you're not teaching them that, no, the Lord He's not so disconnected from what happens in our lives that we're literally like, we are prone to be attacked by the chaos of our world, and God has nothing to do with protecting us. Well, this is not true. Right. It's just not true.
Yeah. So to put names on them, we've hinted at them, but to put names on them, here are the 4 foundational harms he is pointing to. Number 1, social deprivation. Number 2, sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Number 3, attention fragmentation. Number 4, addiction. So social deprivation, since 2012, the time adolescents spend with friends in face-to-face settings has dropped 50%, and the pandemic only made it worse. And I want to say, for anybody who doesn't and hasn't worked with young people, it is a very, very surprising phenomenon when you talk to young people, and out of the context that I came out of, and when I started youth ministry, it persisted that young people still prized the driver's license because they wanted to go various places and be together, physically together. And so if you think that's still sort of the norm, it just isn't. Right. The norm now is interaction through phones, through text messaging, through social media, and I don't want to overwhelm people, but it is a challenge to some degree because it's like, well, how do they do it? Yeah, they do it in a lot of different ways. It is not uniform. Some are more on Discord. There are different platforms, but the way to summarize it is they are interacting with each other, not in what I would call really human ways, where it is face-to-face, where the norm is being together, doing things, as much as it is I'm alone doing something, and then I send out a text message, and then we might be going back and forth in sort of shorthand, but I'm doing that with a lot of different people at once, in an unpredictable fashion, and so it's not dedicated to relationship in a way that most of us would go, well, that seems bad, that it's not dedicated to a relationship. No, it's not. It's more dedicated to, and I think this is accidentally, but it's more dedicated to convenience, to ease. And there are elements of this that's like anxiety to some degree is driving kids to go, getting driver's license seems like a lot going on there. Driving seems pretty intimidating. Yeah. But also there are legitimate questions, because if you don't have a context to go, hey, it's way better to go to somebody's house or to just be together, and you've only ever lived in a situation where it's like, why go to somewhere? Then I would have to be face-to-face with somebody, and I couldn't text all my other friends, right. Or it would sort of limit me, that there is again, kind of a mirage that young people are often kind of going, well, this seems better. I can be here and sort of at my leisure contact people that I want to while doing things that I kind of like to do, and things that all of us can relate to are also happening, like while I'm also sort of scrolling through YouTube or whatever, kind of doing the things that I usually do, because what I call micro entertainment, just these little ways, these various kinds of shows and videos that have gotten our attention have their claws in you, and you're kind of going, well, I got to be doing some of this, so I can't be dedicating time like to this other person, not to mention that they're probably thinking the same thing. They're over there doing the same thing as me. And, I think one way to summarize this is, it occurred to me the other day how strange it is that I'm subscribed to like 160 YouTube channels, right? And of all, I could not name for you of my friends and the people I'm close to, I don't know what they're subscribed to, because we live in these worlds of just like, well, my subscriptions are my interests.
Right.
And we're not... there are no means right now where we share interests in that way. There's no practice of getting together with some kind of tablet that is the width of two people, even if it's a TV show, even if it's a TV, that is, and saying, oh, we all know we all like this channel. Why don't we get together and watch it together? That's just not a thing that's done.
Right. Well, I was wondering if you have time to focus on this attention fragmentation. I have heard, I think Matt Damon talked about this, how impacted, this current generation is, how's it impacted the movie industry?
Sure.
They said that a lot of times now in kind of plot structures that they have to, like in the beginning of a movie now, they have to have like a pretty like intensive like action sequence.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, then people won't watch it. They'll turn it off and watch something else. So it's impacted like story structures.
Yes.
It's so fascinating because, again, if you're an industry that makes entertainment, you are somewhat as enslaved to the audience that is in consuming the entertainment. Mm-hmm. And if they have a million options, and the only way to get their attention is to have because I think he would argue that it wasn't until like maybe middle way in the movie, but later you would have an extensive like action sequence.
Sure.
I'm thinking like even
that's what you're building up to usually.
Yeah, because like even like Born Identity, which in the movie is fairly old.
There's a lot of exposition.
It starts off with a body just floating on the water.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have a massive like action sequence.
Right.
It's not till later that you have like kind of a car chase thing, whatever thing like that. So it does present this how this attention fragmentation has even impacted how things are made.
Yes.
And it's so fascinating.
Yeah, and there are problems because you immediately kind of go, wait, are we feeding this beast? Yes. I mean, some of the answer about all four of these things is, oh yeah, we've been feeding these, and it's not all new, but it is a problem because we've been feeding these problems and making them worse. And so sleep deprivation, I think, is an easy one for all of us to point to. I mean, a lack of sleep leads to depression, anxiety, irritability, cognitive deficits, poor learning, and lower grades. This is, again, not a new challenge, but I don't think because of the way we each, it's like because we all got handed these devices right around within like a 5-year span, some of us don't think at all about things like, well, yeah, when I go to bed at night, I put my phone on silent. And that's it. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, for many young people, that phone is going to be a blue light in their face for hours and hours. Right. And then it's going to wake them up periodically through the night as people say, like, well, I'm up, I want to talk about this. And then other, the way young people live with phones is different from that standpoint. Because, again, if you think this is your primary means of connection, well, then I better be ready to wake up at 2 a.m, depending on who you're talking about, at the very least. A part of this is just like the curiosity of teenagers, and like all of us who lived in any age where a teenager was a thing, when there was a new part of it, it's like whether it's a CD player is like the center of teenagers. Like, well, I knew a guy who had 500 CDs. It's like, did he need all of those? Like, oh, no, nobody did. But hey, he was the guy who did that. There are people who are pushing this thing so far. And that is something of what it is to be a teenager. But the sleep deprivation is a real thing. And so we can all estimate that one. Addiction, I think many people, we all struggle to kind of go, well, where's the line of addiction? Well, look, when it becomes something that you can't control yourself in regard to it. And as a Christian, we can say, if you are gaining your value from anything else than God, if you look for validation and if you look for your identity from anywhere else than God, then it can be taken from you. And so in this context, the way they say it is many kids are using their phones like dopamine slot machines, always in search of the next hit. And big tech has designed their apps to encourage this behavior. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And so not only can we become addicted to any good thing that God has given us because we're broken that way, we started out being able to get addicted to these sorts of things. And if anyone who hasn't researched this, this product, social media in particular, has been now designed, engineered, re-engineered to keep you involved in it, to bring you back to it, and if you are willing to, let it do notifications on your phone and all these sort of things, to never leave you alone. And that is not an overstatement. To literally, periodically, at whatever intervals you will allow it, to just say, hey, come back, come back, come back, come back. And that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I remember Kevin DeYoung's book, Crazy Busy. This is a small little book, but it's I would encourage anyone to read it. He says, like, a phone is almost like you're in a massive room and people are constantly tapping you on the shoulder when you're talking to someone. Hey. Look at this.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good way to state it. It's constantly being tapped. Hey, look, and it's constantly like distracting you from a human conversation. What you're like, maybe if you're in church listening to God's word being taught, you're constantly like looking at, I got another notification. And I think we are in some ways, and I think we shouldn't be all that surprised by this, but I think it's, it is kind of how we are as humans. We don't really see the impact of technology until we really start seeing some of the negative fruit from it. But this is now what we're seeing is the consequences of postmodern philosophy.
Yes.
That the philosophers aren't saying to the technology creators, I don't know if this is good. I'm not sure this is good for human life.
Yeah.
But we are so individualized. There's no one stating kind of an absolute way, this is wrong and this is right. Yep. When you don't have that philosophical foundation, then who are the ones that are going to critique the technology creators? Because the technology creators aren't really they're not asking themselves the question, we can do this, but should we?
Right.
I mean, I saw Oppenheimer not too long ago, and you see someone at the end of the movie, I don't know if you've seen it, but Einstein and Oppenheimer having this question of the fear that we're going to destroy the world. And then basically Einstein says, I think we have succeeded to destroy the world. Like basically we are able now to literally destroy the world, like with missiles. And I think you have scientists who, again, they're building technology for whatever reason they are. And technology companies are the major movers and shakers in the world today. I mean, you think of the major industries today, it's not Whirlpool or GE, it's Amazon, it's Apple,
right.
It's Microsoft. Right. These are the major companies in our world. I mean, Disney is not a major company. The fear with Disney right now is, will Apple just buy them out?
Yeah.
They're that profitable. And they're technology creators. And again, Apple's not asking the question, should we create an iPhone? Is this good for humans? They legitimately can pull this out at any moment of their life and scroll and scroll and scroll. And where are the philosophers to say, this isn't good for people? Like, are we thinking about the ethics of these things?
Right.
And they're not powerful enough to check and balance these things. And so, I mean, even Amazon, even though it's not a phone technology, legitimately you can buy anything you want at any point.
Yes.
So people talk about like debt and financial insecurity. How Dave Ramsey is Dave Ramsey, but how hard is it for Dave Ramsey to get people to not get into debt with Amazon?
Yeah.
Literally, you can buy things with one click.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yep.
Like, anything.
Yeah, that's a challenge to not give yourself to that. But we are living now in this time where they told us, you and I went to some of the same college ministry classes where they told us, well, look out, moral subjectivism, postmodernism is coming. Yeah. People trying to make up their own meaning, make up their own truth, make up their own ideas of goodness. And we watched for it, and the world has been unprepared for what it's like when people actually kind of do that. Walk around saying, well, I'll follow my truth. And then the world has been surprised as people go, well, my truth seems very unfortunate for you. It's like, yeah, that was baked in from the start, but we're now living in that world, and we're living in it deeply as people. Now that people have swallowed it, it's not as simple as, it seems really bad that you are sort of making up your own way, making up your own meaning, making up your own truth. Do you want to stop that? And oh boy, it reminds me of China's one child only policy. Stopping people from having children is one kind of goal. Encouraging them again to have children after you stop them is an entirely different kind of goal. Yeah. And that's where we live right now. I am hearing many voices who are saying, this is not at all turning out like I thought it would turn out. Well, we now have a new kind of problem, though. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and take a break? We've already covered a lot of ground, and finishing there on what exactly the challenges are is a good place to break, and then turn the corner to what are the lessons we can take away, reforms, and what can we do about it.